learning the skills of what you do when you're with a group, there's a conflict and you're trying to manage it. Learn any of that in law school? Learn any of that in your training?
Well, no. I mean, the training that there's things that happened in law school that help. But that doesn't say a darn thing about law school, because I think it has something more to do with what kind of a law student I was. I really was not there because I wanted to be a lawyer. I was there for other reasons, because of things I didn't want to be. So that's nobody's fault. I think that I learned a great deal as a sort of apprentice mediator in the labor agency that I got to in 1965. I just followed people around. I rode along with them. They were wonderful at sort of nurturing your skills and letting you watch and then observing you. And it was a classic.
If there's one lesson that should be preserved for the ages of what you observed that you still carry with you as being sage advice, what would it be?
Well, I don't think about those days that much anymore, but I mean, I think that I gained a sense of the potential of the work, that when it's done well, that it is a real contribution to the case at hand, and that doing it well is a whole other discussion, what that constitutes. But one of the interesting things, my very earliest exposure was to private sector collective bargaining, where typically the people who represented the parties were very skillful. And they made use of the mediator, as opposed to what happened later in public sector, where the mediator tended to be the most experienced person in the room, at least in the early days. And in those days of working with sophisticated negotiators representing private sector companies and unions, what I found out was that sometimes you're an instrument and you need to allow yourself to be played by the performers, that it isn't a matter of taking over the dispute. It's a matter of making judgments as to what your, how much you ought to be performing and how much you ought to be laying out. This is a point that I make later, and you've heard me make this about the analogy to music, when I say that I think the music consists as much of the rests as it does of the notes. And I think that became obvious to me early on when I watched experienced mediators working with experienced negotiators, and from time to time sort of laying out and letting the negotiators get the job done.
Well, the other phrase that I've stolen from you that I've most appreciated, is the term "just enough," doing just enough, not trying to do more.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I observed very early on as I watched mediators working, good mediators working with sophisticated negotiators. That there was a contribution to be made, and that it wasn't appropriate to sort of be more aggressive with the parties than was required.